They said no one survived a Maulbeast attack. Even half a glimpse through the dust storms of Trask 7 was enough to freeze a crew mid-stride. Massive, plated things that tore through rock and metal alike, hides dark as obsidian armor, eyes molten and alive. The company's manuals called them environmental hazards. The miners called them the last thing you ever see. Lena Voss had never been good at obeying warnings. She arrived 3 years after the first HAB domes went up, when scaffolds still outnumbered walls and ore veins were rumors wriggling across survey maps. Mechanical engineer by trade, systems tech by necessity, insomniac by temperament. She signed on for frontier pay and stayed for the quiet. Trask 7 was ugly, brutal, and lonely. It suited her fine. Most days she worked under a fractured sun, coaxing shattered drills back to life, where Maulstone ate cutter teeth for breakfast. When a shift ended, she'd sit by the perimeter fence with a cup of synthetic coffee and watch the dunes breathe. Sometimes they swelled and collapsed like a sleeping animal. Sometimes they moved when the wind wasn't moving. The others called her strange. Maybe she was. The colony was small, 142 miners, 3 medics, 1 corporate overseer who kept to his office and filed complaints to orbit with the devotion of a priest. Life ran on routine: dig, process, survive. Most weeks the Maulbeasts kept their distance. When they didn't, alarms blared and turrets spat plasma into haze. Everyone ran for shelter. No one expected the day one would follow her home. The collapse hit Shaft 12. Lena joined a repair team after a tremor pancaked the midsection. 6 miners unaccounted for. The dispatcher droned, "Wait for autonomous rescue drones." Lena clicked off her mic. You didn't wait for drones when air pockets might be thinning by the breath. She and 3 others cut through debris, layer by stubborn layer. The scanner showed heat flickers, alive, faint. Then one blip larger than all the rest, pulsing like a furnace. Probably magma, someone said. Lena didn't think so. They punched through fractured ore and the air clawed at their skin with heat. Wedged between buckled support struts and slabs of Maulstone lay something enormous, alive, breathing raggedly. Armor plates shimmered, and under the plates a dim, flowing light, veins of fire in stone. One forelimb twitched against a beam that might as well have been a mountain. The others fled the second it moved. Lena stayed. She didn't know why. Maybe the sound. Not a roar, not threat. A groan so deep it rattled her ribs. Pain. Fear. It reached a part of her training manuals had left untouched. It was dying. No one was coming for it. She turned off her radio. Then she went to work. 2 days. That's how long she spent freeing the Maulbeast. Plasma cutters, hydraulic jacks, swearing that fogged her visor. Every section she cleared, the creature twitched, and a low rumble rolled through rock and breath. Once, when she leaned close to check a stress line, an eye the size of her helmet opened. Gold light pinned her. She froze. The eye closed again, heavy with pain. She kept cutting. Finally, the last plate of rock sheared loose. The creature rose, slow, monumental, as if lifting old gravity from its back. And for an instant, she thought its weight would crush her without malice, just from the simple physics of being alive. Instead, it looked down, and the look felt like a decision she had not been invited to, something far older than she was. Then it turned and walked into the dark. Lena thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. 3 days later, when she returned to camp, it was waiting. Right at the edge of the perimeter lights, bulk hunched like a hill, plates reflecting the twin moons. The guards froze. The turrets whined as they spooled to lethal. Lena stepped past the line before anyone could fire. "Easy," she said, and her voice shook into the loudspeakers. "He's not here to fight." "He?" someone muttered. "Yeah," she said. "Brick. His name's Brick." That was when her reputation changed forever. No one wanted to work within sight of her at first. Lena didn't blame them. Brick stood 2 stories at the shoulder and weighed more than a drop shuttle loaded for burn. He shadowed her like a second horizon, silent save for a low rumble that made dome glass vibrate. Sometimes she woke to find him curled outside her cabin, a mountain that had decided to keep watch. The overseer demanded she remove the animal. She asked if he wanted to tell Brick himself. He declined. Rumors sprinted. Some swore she'd implanted control nodes. Some whispered she'd cut a deal with a hive. The truth was simpler and stranger. He just followed. She talked to him while working, a habit at first, explaining system quirks, cursing supply shortages, humming off key and vac. Once she caught him watching welding sparks, head tilted, as if the pattern meant something he could almost read. Weeks passed, and something shifted. Brick began to patrol the perimeter. He shredded a pack of rockworms that had been eating the pipeline conduits from within. When claim jumpers tried for the ridge under a moonless sky, they didn't make it past the scree. After that, no one argued about his presence. Lena refused to call it training. "We're roommates," she said. The colony adapted, slowly. Miners left offerings, scraps of sheet metal, foil packets, anything shiny, near the place where Brick liked to rest. They joked tribute, but their laughter had an edge. Brick tolerated everyone. He answered only Lena. She crossed dust fields with a Maulbeast at her heel, and hallways made room without thinking. The few children watched from windows. An engineer in a patched suit, and a monster who cast a city's worth of shade. Then the ground learned a new language for fear. Trask 7's storms weren't wind and rain. They were geological. Pressure changes under the crust tripped chain collapses that could buckle a plane like a bad fold in paper. The colony had sensors. They bought minutes, sometimes seconds. The quake started as a groan and rose into a rolling shout. Shaft 9 went first, then 12. Again. 6 miners trapped. Oxygen counting down. Lena was in the control tower when the first alarm stacked. There was no thought, just motion. She ran. She found Brick already at the collapse mouth. The ground still shivered under his weight. She pointed. He went. No machine they owned could move stone like that. Brick carved channels through slabs that had buried drills whole. The rescue crew kept up by cursing and willpower, marking oxygen, splicing hoses through trembling air. Minutes stretched thin. They broke through into a pocket choked with dust and terror and life. The miners staggered into light. They stopped. They stared at the Maulbeast kneeling as if in prayer, sides heaving, eyes dim to ember. One of them reached out and touched a plate. Brick did not move. He watched until every last human was clear. That was the day everything changed. Fear became something else. Not comfort. No one ever relaxed entirely around a living avalanche. But respect held like a wall. Maulbeast sightings at the perimeter plummeted, as if the others learned the shape of a territory and chose not to test it. Months later, the company sent an inspection team in clean white suits. They found a humming operation with 0 hostiles logged for 42 days. They filed it as statistical anomaly. The miners called it Brick's Line. Lena called it home. Time moved in Trask 7's slow, grinding way. Children were born who had never learned to fear the silhouettes in the haze. Brick was part of the colony's rhythm. Warning when quakes began. Counterweight when panic spiked. Myth beginning to root. He aged slowly but visibly. Armor lost some sheen. Movements grew deliberate, like a heavy machine choosing not to waste parts. Lena set a ring of sensors along the perimeter. She tuned them to a heartbeat she'd learned by ear, the bass pulse she could feel in her chest when she leaned against Brick's plates on a cold night. The sensors pulsed with him, a soft throb in mesh networks and maintenance logs. "It keeps him calm," she'd say, if anyone asked. People asked how she had tamed a Maulbeast. She gave the same answer every time. "I didn't. I listened when no one else would." They called it modesty. It wasn't. Years later, during the cold cycle, Brick didn't rise. Lena found him half buried in frost dust, heat still banked under plates like a fire that doesn't want to go out. She sat with him for hours. Her suit monitors recorded the slow taper of surface temperature, the long fall of heat into stone, a graph that looked like a horizon without a sun. He did not move again. When the miners came to her, she wasn't crying. She had one glove off and her palm on armor that had gone from beast to boulder while she watched. "We will need to move him," someone said gently. She shook her head. "No, the mountain can stay." They buried her next to him 20 years later. Old age, still on a ladder the day before, tightening bolts on an ore processor no one else understood. They built a new control dome on the ridge overlooking the fused outcrop that had once breathed. Children climbed it, sure-footed as goats on a monument whose meaning they felt in their hands. Every founding day, someone repeated the sentence Lena had first said over coffee, back when the camp still ran at the sound of turrets spooling up. "Humans do not tame everything. Sometimes we just make friends who could kill us." The line never got less true. Centuries turned the company into footnotes, and Trask 7 into a mother tongue. Archivists off-world dug through corrupted logs and neat lies. There was no entry for a Maulbeast partnership, no contract or waiver, only a half-mangled note in an engineer's file. Subject BRK-27 displays unusual loyalty. Possible cohabitation behavior. Recommend non-interference. Historians argued myth versus record. They always do. On Trask 7, people argued about other things, about when to plant, where to sink the next shaft, which sensor arrays hummed right. They kept one truth like a tool at the belt. When the plains began to sing, when a deep, low rumble threaded up through bedrock and soles and tooth roots, you didn't panic. You listened. Old miners taught new ones to count the intervals. They called it the brick beat, long pulse for distant movements, shorter for local slippage. The pattern let them evacuate shafts before collapses and brace corridors that used to fold like paper. Someone eventually proved the plates of Brick's fused body had become a resonant organ, a tuning stone for pressure waves that rippled before quakes. The colony wired the outcrop to the grid, not as decoration, not as relic, but as instrument. Weaponized kindness, Lena might have called it if she'd liked the word weapon. A friendship turned into infrastructure. A monster's resting heartbeat turned into warning bells and lullabies. They built their defenses around that note. Schools taught it. Weddings timed vows to it. Babies fell asleep to it. Drill captains who had never met a Maulbeast swore under their breath when the beat skipped a bar. By then, the Maulbeast had faded to rumor again. Or maybe they were simply elsewhere. Deeper. Patient. People told one another that occasionally, out past the far ridge in a dust storm, a shape the size of a moving hill paused and turned its head toward the dome. Not hostile. Curious. Listening back. Some say it's just light playing tricks and geology doing what geology does. Others say Brick never entirely left, that what kindness does to a place is the same as what water does to stone. It teaches it a shape that lasts longer than memory. And in the signal between Earth and stars, across mesh networks, through frameworks of rock and habit, Lena's lesson remains, practical as a wrench, profound as gravity. Kindness isn't weakness. It's a way of changing what the world can do. On the 500th founding day, the colony council gathered at the outcrop. Children sat cross-legged on the warm stone, palms down to feel the low, patient thrum. An old sensor array blinked its soft lights. Pulse, pause, pulse. Technicians had long since swapped parts and rewritten firmware, but the rhythm was the same. The chief engineer, a woman with a crooked nose broken by a falling wrench 2 decades ago, stood with her hand against the stone and spoke to the kids in a voice that carried, "There was a time Trask 7 tried to kill us, one wrong step at a time. We survived because someone listened hard enough to hear a friend inside a threat. That's our inheritance. Not the ore, not the domes. This." She didn't point to the reactors or the turbine towers turning wind into light. She pointed to a ridge of fused maulstone that used to wake and watch and go back to sleep. After the speeches, the kids scrambled up the black slope and left offerings where the stone flattened into a gentle saddle, rivets and ribbon, a well-polished spanner, a scarf bright as new wire. Not tribute. Thank you notes in a language that didn't need writing. As twilight slipped copper across the dunes, the ground made a sound like distant thunder and closer breath. A hush fell without anyone asking for it. People closed their eyes, even those who insisted they were only there for the food stalls and the concert. The beat threaded through bodies and bones and steel. It said, "I am here. You are here. We are watching what might go wrong, together." In dread they had learned to listen. In hope they had learned to stay. In awe they understood that listening had lifted them, changed them, turned a frontier into an ancestry. Long after the last song, when light from the dome sloped away from the ridge, and the cold cycle began to taste its way back into the air, the outcrop kept humming, and the colony went on, the way living things do when they're held by something older than fear. No one survived a Maulbeast attack, they used to say. They were right, in a way. They did not survive it. They made it family,